Morning. My name is Siegfried Trent. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about the Christian religion, specifically things in the Bible. Now, the two of us may have a little bit different ground that we're going to argue on, but we'll try to get some clash going between the two of us. So this discussion arose from the idea of, I tend to feel that that the Christian religion, the Old Testament and the New Testament, are almost different religions. And even within these books, there are many different views and ideas. I tend to see the character of God as being something very problematic for me from a moral perspective. But I like the character of Jesus and the message that he teaches. So I generally think that the New Testament or the Christian religion is a little bit more noble, a little bit more moral than the Old Testament faith. Of course, most Christians don't split these things up that way. I'm not a Christian. I'm an atheist, generally speaking, but I respect religion. I respect all different religions, and I like to study about them, and I like to argue with people about them because I think they're interesting and important topics. So I'll give a brief case for the problems I have with God. I find God to be kind of a tyrant character, a mighty king who is right simply because he's powerful. He's cruel with many of his devoted followers. Now, maybe in some cases they deserve punishment, but he also punishes relatively innocent people. The story of Exodus, I think, is one in which he punishes all the Egyptian people for the act of their king, rather than punishing the king for his acts. And he treats people in a very cruel way. Even when there's a possibility for mercy, God decides, no, we're not done with the punishments yet. He curses Adam and Eve. He puts them in a situation where they're doomed to fail. He tests Job for no reason other than seeming vanity on God's behalf. I find him to just be a pretty reprehensible character. Not the worst imaginable, but not a great guy. Now, Jesus, on the other hand, he never commits any acts of violence upon anyone other than overturning some tables and chasing some people out. But these people had it coming, I think, and that punishment is not like destroying villages or murdering the firstborn or anything like that. So I find his actions to be justifiable, and that's about as harsh as they come. He preaches humility. He preaches kindness to other people, even to a degree that I myself cannot emulate the amount of kindness and forbearance that he asks of people. So I find that extremely noble. There's very little, some things he says that maybe I disagree with, but very little that he does that I find morally questionable. Now, I'm happy to talk about other parts of the Bible too, because the other parts of the New Testament are more questionable for me, but still, I think I can weigh them against the Old Testament. I'll try to make my case.
Okay, so at least I will start right away to say that I'm an atheist. That's important to know for the audience. I'm also sympathetic. In fact, I have my wife who is a Christian. Obviously not I will use the word fundamentalist, but I want to say it's not very strong. We have a Bible in home or things like that. People are free. My child is baptized. And so first of all, I want to make it clear that I will look like I'm attacking Christian views. I think there are many decent people. I'm relating with them. I let them to believe and act on their beliefs. So the second part, which I want to say, that I think there are very many to defend in a way Siegfried's position. I think there are many questionable, at least, passages in the Old Testament, and not only in Exodus. Especially, I would say the worst book of the Old Testament is 2 Kings, because in fact, the book how was written, it says at the end that many people did wicked things. So if you know the Samson story, it's a very cruel, immoral story. If you know okay, so I won't say that, believe me, it's not only this. There is other part where say the pregnant women, the belly should be cut out again for things like that. So if you pick these passages, obviously they are appalling, and I don't want to defend them, excluding to say really they are appalling, but what I want to go and how I would base my criticism with is that there is how the Bible was written. This is I'm familiar with both Old Testament and New Testament, So I will go on basically what, if you read up scholars' books, both about Old Testament and the New Testament. So, for example, probably you'll know that Jesus' story as Gospels was based on few traditions, and similarly, the Old Testament, if the prevalent position today is at least it was written from 4 sources. So Moses never wrote, for example, Exodus. There were many stories which were clubbed together.
Right.
So it's the same for the Old Testament and for the New Testament. The New Testament, the Gospels were multiple sources, sometimes combined. The Gospel of Luke, for example, contains unique passages to Luke, some passages from a Gospel like Mark, if not Mark, it's exactly in front, and an extra tradition named Q. Okay, so first of all, I will go with traditional view, but scholarly view. So in this way, I don't have a bias saying I'm an Orthodox Jew versus a classical Jew, secular Jew. And the same it will be for Christianity. So I will not criticize. So when I will say Jesus is evil, for example, I will not say it's overly evil because of it has good passages. But also I will not take that Jesus is God. For the
Yeah.
Okay, so first of all, knowing that the Old Testament is many stories built together, I think it's a much better literature. And I will give the first reason, which is maybe obvious, maybe people don't know. Most of Torah, so the first 4, let's say 5, the 5th book was written later. But let's say the first 4 books of Bible, probably know a third of it is poetry. It's not transposed. I don't know how, if your English transposes when it's poetry and you can see it grouped.
Kind of.
But just to say, I don't know any passages in New Testament which is poetry. The other part is that most of them, they were adapted mythology of locals. So like you read Greek legends, and even they have some seed of truth. It's not evil in themselves because they are adapted on the world of that time. So if you take the stories of King Arthur kills humans, probably. I don't know all the stories, but I know, you understand. And you don't think King Arthur because he killed his evil character. You think even as a wise. So the stories are quite wise. Most of them, they were the wiseness of the region. And okay, so this is the New Testament. You have many wise stories. The Job itself, it's mostly poetry. And the passages of the starting and the ending, they were added later. And I personally, as you say, shows a vindictive God. The story, first of all, it's at odds with some Jewish thinking. So, for example, it's clear that God is in a council with Satan because this looks like a pantheon. But the story itself, if you take the poetry in the middle, it's quite decent, saying that, I mean, I don't approve. And in fact, in Job, I have one of the best passages I like as an atheist. And it's that one when the friends stay with the sick person just to quiet and consolate the person. Job. I'm not a big fan of morality of Job, but that passage, I found it very moralizing. Okay,
Yeah.
so let's go shortly with the New Testament. So the New Testament, the standard view, including the tradition, is that Jesus was an apocalyptic prophet, meaning that he was waiting for the end of time. This reflects Daniel book. He names himself one title in the Daniel book, naming he was the Son of Man. And what was interesting about, if you look the references back, the Son of Man is the guy who makes justice. As in today's culture, we see the justice woman with a balance and she is blind. The Son of Man will bring justice. And I'm not saying Jesus was the guy who said he will bring the sword. Okay. So this Son of Man is the guy who will come on earth and will kill everyone who breaks the justice of God, whatever it means. And he says, when you say he's meek and kind, he says, be meek, because otherwise God will punish you, will kill you, will throw you to Gehenna, or Christian said later, he'll throw you in hell or something like that. So this is not quite a kind view. Imagine, I will say, one follow the rules of driving, because otherwise your eyes will be blocked out or whatever. Maybe say, yes, it's nice, the outfit, but Jesus as message at least, and it's not only Jesus. Paul, but I know you don't agree with Paul, but John the Baptist was saying the same. Go repent because the end of the world is near. This is Jesus' message 101. So something even in spirit, it doesn't look. And if you look to Revelation, the Revelation, in fact, is how say it's a fulfillment of what Jesus supposedly would do. So most people think how it will be on Revelation, there will be 4 horsemen. But Jesus, the Lamb, brings these 4 horsemen because he wants to bring justice, but he does it through a lot of suffering. So Jesus doesn't look so meek in that context. I think as a real person, he was quite a decent person. And he was not thinking as God, but the God of Jesus at that time, or the God who first early Christians would think about Jesus, was not quite of of God. So that's kind of the outlook I'm having on that.
Okay. Well, I can respond to that a little bit. I mean, of course, we're arguing on a little bit different grounds, but I think that's okay because they're both interesting. We just have to see where we can find some disagreement or clash. So one thing I'll say, I look at the characters in the book. So what is the character of Jesus? What does he do? A little bit separate from the meaning of the whole book. I mean, that's the Christian's way to read the book is everything is connected. Everything is the word of God. Now, even sometimes, of course, God is describing what evil people do. That doesn't mean God endorses it because he describes it. But everything is all connected. To me, because these are written by different people with different perspectives, they represent the author's perspectives. The Gospels do have some disagreement within them, but they're all pretty similar. And the character of Jesus is pretty similar within them. So I take them as a pretty cohesive set about that.
I object, honestly.
Oh, okay.
So at least for the Gospels, I can say to you, I would say my view of the Gospels, maybe you know a different one. So the 4 Gospels, the first 3, and historically Mark is first, Matthew probably the second, Luke it's similar with Matthew. All these 3 differ very much in the emphasis, but they start from the same text. And and John, it's really it's a Greek philosopher's perspective of Jesus. So,
but do you think the character of Jesus changes between the Gospels? Like he's a different kind of person?
Hugely. Okay. Yes. So I can give to you one very visible one.
Okay, sure.
So when you look in Mark, which is the earliest, Jesus makes all miracles and says to everyone, don't say to anyone. He looks like, this is the title, I've seen it, the Batman of religion. So
it's pretty humble.
So he's very humble. And if you look to Luke or John, in John, he doesn't do miracles anymore. He does signs. So every miracle is a sign of the Jesus coming, but it's really, you'll see there are 7 signs which Jesus does. The miracles are really public and huge, and kind of you're surprised that no one heard about it.
Right, yeah.
So this is a very different emphasis. If you see Jesus, how that he dies on the cross, he really, if you look Mark, he really looked like destroyed humanly. He's quiet, and the single thing he says at the end, he says, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, like, Father, Father, why you have forsaken me? Mm-hmm. And in Luke, he says, he talks with the, I forgot, the thieves on the left or on the right.
Right.
He says, you'll be with me in heaven. When he's taking the cross, he says to the woman, worry about yourself, for you'll have much worse than I will have it. And at the end, he says, happily to God, in your hands I will give my spirit. And in John, again, it's really a different perspective. And he said, yes, it's over. So because there were the signs. So I'm saying I can't see the same uniform message.
I think that's a fair point. It's been a little while since I've read them, right? Mark tends to be my favorite of the Gospels, and the one that I find most, I don't know, grounded, I guess, and realistic. But at any rate, let me say this, though. The point I wanted to make was that the idea of the bringer of justice is something that comes from the Judaic idea of the Messiah, right? So this was a person who was going to reunite the kingdom of Egypt. I mean, Egypt, Israel, bring them together at their holy temple, and establish forever the nation of Israel, of the Jewish people, and they would be righteous under God, and they would not have anybody attack them or beat them up, et cetera, et cetera. It was going to be good times on earth for the people of God. Of course, the Christian religion kind of throws all that out and says the new kingdom of God, maybe it'll be on earth, maybe it's going to be in heaven, but it's for everybody, not just for sort of the chosen people. That's a big change. The bringer of justice. Now, I don't know that Jesus talks much about how he's going to punish anybody, right? Or he's going to cull the world or conquer anything or establish
in fact, in Mark. Sorry. He does, and he does it in Mark. It's named the Little Apocalypses. So you can, I don't know right now the passages because I'll have to have too many, but there is this passage named the Little Apocalypses, and it says like, you'll see, first of all, in your generation, which some people say he didn't fulfill the
right
part, but I'll look for.
Yeah. Well,
but
I mean, I do think Jesus. Go ahead. He kind of walks a line where he is trying to talk about how he fulfills these Jewish prophecies, but on the other hand, he really isn't behaving in the way that the Messiah is described to have been. I mean, he was going to be a king on earth, right? Jesus didn't do that. So I don't know. I feel that's a big difference, and that what he went about doing, he didn't marshal armies, he didn't conquer anything, he didn't try to. He just sort of preached people to be loving and kind, to watch out for their own souls, to not judge other people so harshly, to be meek, to look to their own sins before they look to other people's sins. This is not the kind of vision of Messiah, and most Jews were like,
okay,
this guy is not what
would you agree that? Would you agree that Jesus really very often quotes directly the Old Testament?
Yeah, sure, he certainly does.
Yeah, so for example, the most known quote of Jesus is "Love your neighbor like yourself." This is. Do you know where it's in the Old Testament, or do you think it is in the Old Testament?
Yeah, I've heard that. I mean, the idea of what the golden rule, quote unquote, is pretty common in almost all human philosophy or moral teaching.
Yes, but this quote exactly, "Love your neighbor like yourself." Many people say before God was vindictive in the Old Testament, and after that Jesus came with the new rule: love your neighbor like yourself. Maybe you heard it. I heard it in my church.
Well, go ahead.
Just to say that quote exactly ad literam is in Leviticus. Is the one
who says it though?
Moses, maybe.
Yeah,
I think it's a blended tradition. But yes, it's in Leviticus.
Yeah. Because, like I said, for me, I treat the books as stories, and then there's characters in the stories. Sure. And I'm sort of judging the character of the people in the stories rather than the message in the books overall, which is a little bit different. Sure. That's the big difference between kind of the approach we take. I think.
Yeah. So how I'm seeing about Jesus when you say all these values, yeah, I think most of them they are directly in the Old Testament, but as Christians cherry pick. For example, again in my church there was this passage in Revelation. I'm the guy on your door and knocks. It's Revelation 3:20. Maybe it's many churches. And this is a very soft passage, but the book is really, if you just go from the next chapter, it's horrible from there on.
Yeah.
And even earlier.
It's like a big special effects extravaganza, Revelations.
Right. But I won't say that it looked like an immoral book in my book, to say so. But still, when you... so even that passage when it says Jesus stays on the door and knocks, if you look into the context, it's about one church to repent itself. Yeah. It's not about everyone. But people get the passage out and put like that. And I'm saying that it's very easily for a Jew in the first century to quote directly the Torah and get Jesus' view. Also, one part which I see it as a difference as perspective, human-God relation between Jesus and Moses, let's say, kind of vision. It was that under Moses, you simply had a contract with God. So the 10 Commandments, many people say, are the moral laws. In fact, it's a moral contract. God says you should follow this.
Yeah.
It's a contract. Like
I
we
agree.
have to not curse. So, and this view is quite benign to me. And even if you say cut some parts of yourself or you should eat something specific, these are not quite big rules. I mean, they are big, but if you look today's on driving rules, I remember reading more rules than there are commandments in the Bible. And I'm not judging. I think they're very good to be. There's many rules in driving. But I'm saying to say, I forgot how many commandments, 700, something like that. Maybe 1,000. It doesn't matter. Let's say 1,000 rules. This contract is quite small. And you'll say God punished people because they have a plan. And this was a promise of Israel, supposedly. That if you are friend with God and you follow the contract, God will bless you. And Job is one of the books saying, maybe sometimes later, not now, but so sure. This is kind of the view of the Old Testament. But the God of the New Testament and how Jesus reports it, he says, if you don't follow the contract, you'll have an eternal death with some form of torture, psychological one, let's say so. Some people say it's not. And this is much worse than, basically there is no hell in the Old Testament.
I suppose so. I mean, the New Testament does introduce this idea of eternal torment. Yes. I agree, which is pretty wretched, right? God of the Old Testament doesn't promise that. He'll just turn you into a pillar of salt or raise your town right. or send people to go murder you, something like that. Right. I mean, I don't know what's worse. And, passages of hell, it's pretty contrived. I mean, a lot of the formal ideas of hell are more from extra biblical traditions that are part of the church, right? Within it, I mean, some parts are pretty explicit, some parts are
especially goes from Jesus. So Gehenna, the trash dump on the side of Jerusalem, is Jesus says what people will be thrown. So this is what probably.
But that is where people go when they die, right? That was where they burn the bodies. So I'm not sure that that's a threat of eternal punishment.
Maybe, but they had ossuaries too. So this was an honorable death. So it was not the. But anyway, that was a kind of forever offense for some people. So.
Yeah, I suppose so. Although I don't know if that's significantly different, right? To say that, well, God will come and pillage you, or if you don't purify your soul, well, then you'll be punished on your death. I guess both. I'm not necessarily against punishment and justice, right? So if somebody does something bad, right. Well, then something bad could come to you. That's okay. And if I was to say there's a redeeming part of Revelation, it is a big FX show. It's sort of to me, it's a fantasy. It's not like a real story about people. It's a fantasy about this epic battle, and it's meant to kind of inspire you, right? To say, my God's really powerful, and eventually there's going to be a big showdown between good and evil, and we're going to win. It's going to be great. Unless you're the bad guys, then you're going to lose big time, right? So I have a hard time taking it seriously as a kind of a moral teaching. To me, it's more sort of the Star Wars movie of the Bible, it's entertainment almost. There's, of course, a big interpretation that it's really a critique of the Roman Empire and how eventually Christianity will take over. Well, that turns out to be true. If it's just a metaphor, then whatever. Taking down the Romans isn't necessarily something that's so terrible, I think. So if you're bad, being punished, I guess is okay. But I feel like Jesus doesn't really punish. He actually forgives a lot of people. He gives them forbearance when they've done something obviously morally wrong or that he thinks is morally wrong. God, on the other hand, well, sometimes he does. I mean, sometimes he shows forgiveness. Other times he kills people that did nothing wrong as far as we know, like the firstborn Israelis, the firstborn Egyptians. I think this is terrible. These kids didn't do anything. Their leaders did something terrible. Maybe some of their parents were complicit in those terrible things. Maybe they were forced to. You don't really argue with Pharaoh, right? But the children didn't do anything. We got to kill them all. Why? Because some other kids were killed. That just seems utterly reprehensible.
Yes. One part which I would defend of is that we have to take into context when the books were written. And that's what I was saying a bit earlier. I mean, I'm not defending, and also the good part is that we know it's fiction, as you said.
Yeah.
Some it's fireworks. The other one, as far as we know, is still fireworks.
Yeah, I think so.
And it's
Yeah, I don't think those things really happened, right? Of course.
right. So, and in that time, there was this view, like, for example, the man gives basically part of himself to make the son. Woman has no contribution. It's clear in the very often in, especially in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
So in this view, killing the sons was really dishonoring. Again, it was a view of Jewish understanding of the world, which will say, again, I'm not approving killing the small children.
100%.
And this is why also we see that David's son, after sinning with Bathsheba, would be killed the son. Again, you say, why the son would be killed and not David? We talk today. I am the guy saying the same thing. Why this, or why human sacrifice, which is quite, I would say Jesus, it's also human sacrifice, but you see human sacrifice even explicit with Jephthah and his daughter.
Right.
And the Jephthah is a soldier coming from the war and says he will sacrifice whatever he will see, and he sees his daughter. Why really an innocent person, and is described as this? So, but I'm saying this is quite very little, because this is the context that the children belong to the father. It was just a property in a way, and the line.
But I'm not obligated just because they felt differently to agree with their moral stance, right? To them, maybe that was moral.
Right.
I don't think it is. To me, moral judgments are always a personal thing. You know, like, I think this is good, I think this is bad.
Okay, so
why.
Let's turn the table. Let's be in this way, and I'll show to you some bad passages. Probably you know some of the bad passages. So of Jesus, to go directly, Jesus saying. So Jesus, in few instances, names his opponents hypocrites. Probably you heard about this, like Pharisees or Sadducees.
Right.
Sadducees were kind of scholars, let's say. So Pharisees were regular priests. I would say as equivalent, it will be a pastor, a Pharisee, but it will be a very literalist one. Okay, so one part when Jesus attacks Pharisees, it says it's because you don't follow your tradition. Basically, why don't you strictly follow the law? But the part of the tradition which is critical, it was exactly about children's disobeying fathers. So it says, why don't the child which doesn't listen, the disobedience, something like that, has to be killed? This is your commandment. Jesus says this. And after that says, you hypocrites, you forgive the children because they give to church. That's his justification.
Yeah.
That's the commandment. You should not twist the commandment. And this is quite immoral in my book. Yeah.
I guess so.
If you want, I can search the passage.
But I don't think here Jesus is advocating for them to, I mean, his intent is not to get them to kill children, right? It's not to stone disobedient children. But his intent is to get them to say, look, you're being really harsh over here. You have this religion, you're picking and choosing. You're not really, but I think what he wants them to do is to give forbearance to somebody else, right? To be more forgiving, not to be less. He said,
no, that passage definitely is not about it. It's really about that. Basically, we as atheists sometimes have to face this, saying for a pastor who is, let's say, homophobe, will say, don't forget Jesus says, sell all your stuff. So you want to hurt them where it hurts, basically.
Yeah.
And Jesus says, look, you don't want to create rift in families. For example, listening strictly to the law that you should kill your child, but instead you prefer sacrifices either from the children or parents for your own benefit. That's what Jesus was meaning. And he was not curious about, is it moral or immoral? Probably he thought it's moral, in my view, about killing children, but he was saying simply that they choose. You understand? They priests basically would accept no sacrifice, benefits, basically.
I don't know. I wouldn't see that as an endorsement of killing children so much as a critique of the hypocrisy of the priests.
Sure, but that was the passage he picked, sadly.
Yeah. But he didn't hurt anybody, right? Like, I mean, I guess that's the thing. Like, he didn't do anybody's harm. Maybe he's showing, an acceptance of these ancient rules, but it's the ancient rules that are the problem, at least from our moral perspective. He's not actually enacting them.
Okay, let's take some other passage because it's fun just to talk about them. You say you tried today's view about the world, and sometimes Jesus, again, for the same reason like before, but in a very different context, Jesus doesn't wash his hands in the Sabbath. And this is not hygienic. So God, if you know, and most of the rules these were hygienic rules. So I would say look at two levels of, and this is today's understanding. And
sure.
Yes.
Well, I think that would work better on a Christian or somebody who's very hygienic. I'm pretty bad about washing my hands. The CDC has been spying on me, and like I'm pretty terrible about it. My wife makes me do it.
What?
That's fine.
My wife says what? But yeah, I mean, on the list of horrors, it's certainly a fair critique, but I don't think it's terribly impactful. But I also, maybe it's part of his mission. Jesus really took issue with the sacramental rules about cleanliness. I think was one of his big complaints with the Jewish priesthood and hierarchy, and it's still a big part of Orthodox Judaism. Maintaining cleanness, making sure you don't sully this, or that women who are having menstruations sully the holiness of God. To me, that speaks to kind of the petty nature of the character of God, as where Jesus is like, look, it's not that important when all is said and done. Nice to be holy, nice to be clean,
I agree, but I think
ultimately you don't have to worry about it.
Yes, I honestly think that was Jesus' view. Like he said, you should focus about essence. In my equivalent, I was using the driving rules as a proxy.
Yeah,
it will be you shouldn't care about driving rules, but you should care about safety.
Yeah, I agree.
So, but the part is that he talks about the Jewish law. So you can extract that essence. No, so I think what is bad is that definitely God of the Old Testament definitely is very evil at times, or kills at random, as I said to you, the small baby. But on the other hand, you can pick quite decent things.
I agree. Old Testament. God is not all evil. Like, he does some great stuff. I would agree. Creating the world, it's very nice. I really like reality. A lot of people don't care for it, maybe, but I think it's wonderful. So if God created it, great, thank you. I mean, it's not perfect, maybe, but it's very nice.
One part which also we should take it into account is that you said that most of the revelation is fireworks, and it describes how Christians eventually they will prevail, right?
I guess so. Yeah.
Yeah. So, would you agree that God is evil exactly because he shows how Jewish people would win? Because this is what he does.
Maybe, I don't know. I'm not sure I have a strong opinion about it. I tend to like the Christian view that God is for everybody, not just for his chosen friends. Like, sure. I find that a lot more admirable as a philosophy.
I agree.
And like I said, I'm okay with evil people getting what's coming, in a sense, right? Like, if you're a bad person and you do something bad, and it's proportional. Okay, I'm not sure Revelation is proportional. Like, right. You didn't say your prayers on Sunday into the lake of fire. That's bad, right? But if if you're killing people or incredibly greedy and make other people suffer, I think you deserve a little something. I would hope for redemption. That's another theme I like in Christianity: the idea that people can be bad and still be redeemed. I think that's great. Some people don't want to be redeemed much, so that you have to fight against them. That's the way it goes. I don't know.
Right. So to me, at least my understanding is that, as you said, it's the Old Testament. Basically, Abraham makes a pact with God. It's double down with Moses. So when Moses accepts the contract with God, God supposedly has the promise to take care, and he has to do sometimes evil things to either clean up Israel or to make the enemy suffer.
Yeah.
And this is the God of New Testament too. You either
it's I mean, he's there. He's certainly there, right? I can't
Sure.
say that you don't have God in the New Testament. He does, and the Revelation is very much not Jesus, you know,
But
Captain.
also the God in the New Testament gives sometimes one part which is very different in my view, especially if you read in the middle of the Old Testament. The God makes both evil and good, and
Yeah,
there are passages on it.
right.
So, but it is especially said that that God has the power to do good and evil.
Right.
It's
I
in
agree. Yeah.
Isaiah. So, and the strictly thinking in the New Testament is this kind of binary view. Whatever God does is good, so the God looks better in this way, and whatever uh,
Yeah.
is not, it's Satan. But
Well,
of
it's more
course, the
appealing for
God is not
sure to
sure.
me.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Yes.
no, I think, yeah, the people who argue God is always good, I mean, it is a Christian perspective, but that comes more from the New Testament. In the Old Testament, I mean, God is never a villain. He's not like the bad guy, but he
Yes.
does evil. I understand, and I've done a little bit of reading on this, some argument that the word evil is really more like destruction or,
Mhm.
so when God does evil, it means he destroys things as well as creates things. That doesn't
Mhm.
mean, it's not necessarily a moral implication that his justifications are
Sure.
bad, just that he is capable of this and you better be afraid of him. Right.
Yes. So to me, what going back on this, so I think it's important to know that in this way it just feels better, but the God of the New Testament doesn't act better in a stricter sense. So one case I can give to you
Hmm.
is that this is the first chapter of Christopher Hitchens. Jesus comes on earth,
Hmm.
heals the blind, but doesn't kill the blindness. Heals the
Okay.
leper, but not leprosy.
Right.
So
It's a little bit's more than a lot, right? I mean, one less leper is better than no less lepers, I think.
yes,
It
but
would be
these healings
nice
you
to
have them in
cure
Old
leprosy
Testament
also. I
too.
agree.
So
Yeah.
Elijah does
Yeah.
healings,
I mean,
and
personally,
that's
to me, that's sort of more a measure of the implicit limitation of the reality versus the fantasy. If he had said, I cured all leprosy, it
yeah,
would
we
be
agree.
like, yeah, pretty sure you didn't there, buddy. But yeah, I cured a leper. It's hard to say, no, well, he doesn't have leprosy now, so maybe you did. I don't know. I think that's
Right, but
a more
those
limitation.
healings were definitely in the Old Testament too.
Right.
So
Yeah, no, it's true. Yeah. I guess so. But I mean, you have to say that in the Old Testament, God punishes everybody. In the New Testament, there's hope. Maybe you don't get punished, right?
it doesn't. In fact, you said you dislike Job. That's the essence of Job book. I'm not saying I agree. I said I don't agree with the morals,
Yeah.
but God supposedly punishes rightfully. And in fact, in Psalms, the most known atheist passage you heard probably says the I forgot how to say the unbeliever says there is no God. You know this passage, you heard it. Because the
Probably.
continuation,
Yeah.
it's in Psalms and says that basically the unbelievers says there is no God, but there is a continuation, and it says because God will do justice. That's always in all the passages. Always Christian says the
Yeah.
unbeliever says this, but they cut the part when says God will always do justice. So uh, the view, I'm not saying is the right view of the Old Testament, is that basically God will do whatever it needs to do justice, and it
Yeah.
doesn't punish freely. And it says in few, not only one passage, people like which are I forgot unrighteous, I think is the word
Yeah.
in English.
Right.
They are they basically supposedly they get no disease, sure, they have blessings and so on. So
But the problem with that is, and I agree, that's the most common justification for the Old Testament. It's killing the firstborn. I like to use that example. Is just. Why is it just? I ask people, and they, well, I'm not sure, but God has a reason. I mean, he must because he's just. So it's a circular argument, right? To me, if you cannot
right.
tell me why it's just, it's not very just. If you can't explain it to me,
I told you one just to say.
yeah.
I said it was a considered property of. Again, I will take Job as a reference. It's not
Yeah.
the best book, but again,
Well,
in
I
Job,
like Job's story. Like, it's pretty interesting. I think the lesson that it teaches is not necessarily bad. I just think it reflects poorly on God's character.
Right.
Because he's kind of a
right,
jerk. He seems petty, and he's doing this. The virtue of being able to suffer for the sake of others, I think that's a great virtue, right? Sacrifices for your family, sacrifices for your friend. Maybe you don't deserve to suffer, but you want to help somebody else. That's what Job is doing. Job is a very sympathetic character. I think he's a good guy, right? I mean, that's the whole point of the story in a way, right? God is the one that's being pretty awful here.
The part which I want to say about the justice of God, which again, I will take it as a context, because the wife and the children were considered property. When they are all killed, God blesses with twice the numbers of wives and twice the numbers of children. And to me, it makes no sense of today, but that was the understanding. Like,
yeah,
you understand, you can't replace one child, the first child, with two newer ones, let's say. But
well, it's the failed. I mean, the Old Testament, God is a king, and the king is good to those who serve him and bad to those who don't, right? And so Job serves him, so he rewards him. But the king isn't, he does ask sacrifices of you as well. Go out and die for me, please. And so you go do that, and then you're a good guy, and your family gets rewarded. I mean, it shows this ancient value system, which today we bulk at, I think rightly so.
Mm-hmm.
So,
right.
I mean,
yeah. Right. Yes, today I'm fully agreeing that we have a much better moral system than either of the perspectives. But it's quite, I'm not saying, it's too strong to say dishonest. It's quite naive, I would say, to say that the Old Testament was simply the immoral view. I mean, it was thinking humans as property, which Jesus doesn't discard, to be frank.
Yeah. He's not. I don't want to say Jesus is faultless, right? I just like him a little better.
To me, the biggest thing it was that he quotes, again, I would say one passage of Jesus. He says parables, and one of the parables says that because of a servant, the son of the master's son dies, wouldn't be right for the master to beat him very badly for the slave. It's one of the parables. Yeah. So there are passages like this which Jesus could say a hint, look, you could slow down a bit on slavery or something like that, which would be a great opportunity, which he also missed. So, but I'm not too harsh on it.
Yeah, I guess if you're making the situation worse, I have a lot of problems with you. If you're making it a little bit better but not perfect, I'm okay with that. I'm all right with incremental change. Okay. Some people get a little upset with me for being not going.
Do you think that
at the sacrifice of the good? But
do you think that his quote, "Who is not with us is against us," which is very known one quote of Jesus, is a good quote? Because this is it's attributed to Jesus.
No, I would agree that's fault-worthy.
Okay.
I'm just not sure it's as evil as, wiping out civilizations or flooding the entire planet, right? Like, just on the scale of awfulness, it's a lot lower to be a little bit too tribal.
Okay, but if you look, then I have to stick on you Revelation back. Revelation, the central story says that there are martyrs, and around extra 144,000 people, count them differently, but let's say 1 million people will be the only surviving people. Yeah. And everything else will be wiped out with nasty things like disease, hunger, wars, and so on. Is it different from a flood? I would prefer to be drowned, to say you frankly.
Choose your fate.
Yeah.
It's a good point. I'm not sure that I can really argue against that. If Revelation kills almost everybody on Earth, it's just as bad as the flood. Yeah. But although the flood is so indiscriminate, I guess it decided everybody was bad, which seems a bit much. Yeah.
But almost everybody will be bad in Revelation, really. I mean, I don't recommend you to read it, but the most common thing is that Jesus is the guy firstly sending the horseman, then he's described like the lamb, right?
Yeah.
But he says he has the tongue like a sword. and he goes with the armies and kills all the armies on Armageddon, for example.
Yeah.
He does it. It's personal to say it. So
I guess so. Yeah, it's all so much symbolism, right? But I will accede to you that Revelations is very much in character with the Old Testament. I don't feel it's much in character with Jesus or the Gospels, but
in a way it is, because Jesus promised that he is the Son of Man and soon will be justice. And if you don't repent, this is what happens. It's not in character of Jesus killing, because, as you said, there is the reality. And it's quite hard to say Jesus wiped a legion, like later, suppose, almost Messiah guy appeared after him. Maybe you know.
I would say,
So-
I mean, if we're taking a Christian Orthodox perspective, you have to connect the two, and you have to say, yeah, that's Jesus. That's what he had in mind. From my secular perspective, I look and say, that's something, some other guy's fever dream and sort of poetic writing about Rome. It's got really nothing to do with what Jesus was talking about. It's somebody else connecting those dots. Jesus just sort of had in mind that if you're a bad person, God won't take you to heaven and you'll suffer for that. So you really want to get right, which seems fairly nice. He's not going to go tongue sorting people to death or whatever it is.
Okay, let's put, I mean, even if you take the Gospels, and now I will drop for now the reference of this little apocalypse, what he says, really, like, he will come and you'll see the destruction. But let's drop this one. The most benign passage, and I really like that passage of Jesus, to say frankly, is in Matthew 25, when Jesus says, I will separate the goats from the sheep, right? The passage says basically who gives food for the starving, who gives water for the thirsty, who gives clothes, give to Jesus, which is one of the most poetic, and I would say one of the most forgotten passages, sadly, for many Christians, and not only. Okay, but even there it says that it will separate strictly people for some transgressions. And it says if you are not righteous, you will be on the large path. It's quite clear. I'm not saying people are not selfless, but the standard of people being the sheep, the good guys, you should be quite selfless, and quite few people are. I mean, not everyone is fully.
But I think you have to take it in hand with kind of Jesus's message, like said about, taking the thief to heaven, and forgiveness that he's offering people, kind of a recognition that not everybody is perfect, right? But there's still some hope for you. I don't know. I have to do some more reflection on that. I also think there's a lot of contradictions in the Bible, even within the things that Jesus says. But
Sure.
If I'm going to try to synergize them,
I try to do the most charitable view, like Jesus when it describes.
I would say it's very good to challenge people to be as good as possible, to strive for perfection. But it's very bad to hold them to that standard and punish them if they fail, because no one can really meet it. So I think you want to motivate people to be as good as possible, but also have some forbearance for when we fail to some degree. At least my experience as a leader, that's what I do. I try to give people, it'd be a lot better if you did this, but thank you for your effort. So, maybe next time try this.
Here we are in agreement. I'm just saying that the other passages, which I said to you, it's a passage which I really like. In fact, of Jesus, still has this perspective, quite of harsh perspective, and I wouldn't say 99% of Christians fail or whatever. Also, what's very nice about this passage, I would say, outside, is that it doesn't say anything about faith. In fact, it criticizes faith. So it's one of the go-to passages, first of all, say by deeds.
Right.
But also, it theoretically, a decent atheist, it will be saved strictly from the passage. At least. So Jesus, at least, I would say it's a more moral than say you should believe in this. And
I agree. Maybe I try to synergize these messages because I like it, and I want to kind of root for Jesus. So I may be guilty of a little bit of apologetics myself.
That's fine. Do you know the prayer of our Lord's Prayer, it has this part we shouldn't see in God tempt. Sometimes people comment, Jesus God tempts us. This is the prayer saying, to God not tempt us. But what I want you to focus now.
Lead us from temptation, I think, is the one I'm used to. Lead us away from temptation.
Isn't from your temptation, because it's strictly in Greek and Romanian too. It's from God's temptation.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Really?
I always understood it to be Satan or my own sinful nature, right?
Okay, but it's fine. I don't want to talk about. I said I want you to focus about that one. But
okay, that's interesting.
I won't say that the God of Jesus. Right, I'm saying Jesus, God in that context doesn't look ideal. But I won't say you should focus on other passage. At the start, it says like you'll ask for the kingdom of God to come on earth.
Right.
And what does it mean?
Yeah, I don't know.
And believe me, it really means revelation.
Yeah. Well, of course, Jewish people would understand it a little differently. But yeah, in Christianity, I guess it would mean revelation. Yeah. Yeah, which I'm not.
No, honestly, I think in Jesus' mindset, it was, but I understand he will not know what the United States is or Japan is.
Sure.
But he will think that the kingdom of God will clean up the Roman Empire, as you said, and will do eventually justice. And say, we have just to repent, we have just to get the bread to get till the time when the kingdom of God will arrive. And this is in plain text, just to say.
I suppose so. I guess, again, it's kind of my atheist bias in a sense, because I don't really believe in any of that stuff. I find it to be less threatening, right? It's like, later on, we're going to totally wipe you out. I'm like, well, we'll see. Right? That's what it says, like, I'm killing you right now. I'm like, no, right? That's the big problem.
Sure, I think it's an empty threat. I agree.
And so I guess to me, like, I can't see as much moral harm in it when it's an empty threat. But I think you do make a good point that if you are God and you know it's real, it's pretty awful.
Right. So, okay. So I think we have some perspective, at least kind of there. I wanted to stop with my argument.
I think this is a good stopping point. And I'm definitely, after this, I'm going to go look up the little apocalypse and read a little bit more about that. So that sounds interesting.
Okay.
All right. Well, I think you acquitted yourself very well. Again, I wasn't coming in here for a win or loser, but I really wanted to hear what your arguments were, and they're quite good. So I enjoyed them.
Okay. And me too. And I really like you have the good part of which I think is the best part anyway to choose from either books.
Yeah, I mean, as a human being, I'm not going to turn my nose up at any source of moral argument. So I read a lot of different religions. I try to take the parts that resonate with me, leave the parts that I like so much. But yeah. All right.
Okay.
All right. Thanks a lot, man.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It has been. Okay.